The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
What, everybody? He's back. The one and only Elijah Kahlenberg. Hey, buddy. Welcome back. How you doing?
Thank you, Ray. It's great. It's a pleasure to be back. I know the videos that we put out since then have reached an immense following, and I'm happy to be back. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I have to tell you, people really enjoyed your episode. My brother in particular is a giant fan of yours, probably as big of a fan as I am. But anyway, listen, so this is great. And as I told everybody, I really want to try to have you come back and, be a regular part of the show. And so let's talk about kind of the latest and greatest developments that really have taken place since our episode together. And I think the best place to probably start is, talking about Netanyahu's addressing of the U.S. Congress, which was, maybe 2 weeks ago. So give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about Netanyahu's address to Congress. I think the most salient feature, and it's really a premonition for what was to come, specifically on this Monday, because Iran is about to attack Israel in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. But immediately at the start of his speech, he began calling out Iran, calling them the bedrock of terrorism in the Middle East. He mentioned Iran more times than Hamas. And so he made it clear that he views this as a regional aggression in front against Iran. It was a very, I would say, Trump-like speech. It was full of short slogans. Never again. He called the Palestinian protesters or gays for Gaza or gays for Hamas equivalent to chickens for KFC. He was all over the place with this speech. One of the more salient points is Congress. I think the people in Congress definitely got a good leg workout, as there was more than one applause per minute during that entire speech. And it's quite embarrassing. And it wasn't just Congress who was there. We had figures like Elon Musk. We had people who were not in Congress but were invited on behalf of Benjamin Netanyahu in attendance, including many of the hostages and their families. But it was overall on par with what Netanyahu has done in the past. In 2002, shortly after 9/11, Benjamin Netanyahu, as a private citizen, came to speak to the U.S. Congress and issued proclamations to provoke the United States to go to war against both Iraq under Saddam Hussein and against Iran, calling them both powers that desire nuclear capabilities to crush Israel. And from there, they will try and go after the United States. He echoed that sentiment in his speech once again through Iran, but he made clear that if Israel falls, then the United States will be next. So he's trying to present Israel as the bastion of protection for the U.S. in the Middle East. And it's quite ironic because Netanyahu's entire career has been predicated on trying to pull in the United States into a war against Iran on their behalf, trying to get U.S. troops on the ground in the Middle East, which is a bill that Lindsey Graham recently proposed to Congress that would allow U.S. troops to go to the Middle East to fight Iran. And we've already seen tankers and battleships enter the Mediterranean on behalf of Israel, given that Lebanon will likely respond given the assassination of Fawad Shakir. And it's overall a very bleak situation. The speech, it was disgusting, but it was expected. Like, it's Netanyahu. There's not much else you can say. It was full of racist tropes. He said, this isn't even a battle of civilizations. This is a battle between civilization and barbarism. And he referred to Iran as the barbaric entity in this case. With regards to Hamas, he tried to present Hamas as the main impediment to peace in the Middle East, which is ironic given the fact that he is the chief figure responsible for propping up Hamas with Qatar money. And overall, if you want to look at the main impediment to peace, it is Benjamin Netanyahu. He never used the word ceasefire during his speech. He kept on claiming that he will go on until total victory, which we know means the entire annihilation of Gaza, because you can't destroy an ideology. You would have to destroy the entire people to do that. And it's a bleak situation, and he got the full support of Congress, at least those who decided to show up. The only bright spot in this entire situation was Rashida Tlaib. I think she made the proper move compared to some of her Democratic counterparts who decided to boycott the speech. She did not boycott, but what she did is she held up a sign calling him a war criminal. And I think that was the better approach. Rather than shying away and not attending the speech, confront him. share signs, share messages that show he is an evil, sadistic world leader who wants to plunge the entire region and potentially the entire world into war to salvage his own political career. And so the only bright spot that entire day was both the protesters and Rashida Tlaib. I have to give her all the props.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. She got so much social media coverage with, I think she had war criminal and then genocide as another
Yep.
sign. And she kept on, mixing back and forth between the two. I really thought guys like Bernie Sanders and then who else? Even I think maybe Jamal Bowman, he might not even have been invited at that point. Not showing up doesn't do anything. And it's like,
Yep.
it was such a childish move that I think they were totally wrong for that. I did want to talk about two things. That 2002 Netanyahu speech, I didn't even realize he was a private citizen at that time. That makes it even more ridiculous that in 2002, they let a private citizen from another country address our Congress. That's ridiculous. The other takeaway from that, and this is what people have to realize, that just proves this did not start October 7th, 2023. If Netanyahu spoke to Congress in 2002, that's ridiculous. I think he also then spoke in maybe 2012 because I remember he was very defiant and really disrespectful towards Obama during that speech. I'll have to go back and pull it, but I think you nailed everything there. The entire speech was just absurd and ridiculous, and he was just childish during it. It wasn't even like a respectful take. And the most important thing is, you could clearly tell, and you can tell this with all of the other, rhetoric that the pro-Israeli folks on social media are doing, and that is, they don't mention Hamas as much anymore. It's all Iran. Or if they mention Hamas, Iran is right next to it. If they mention Hezbollah, Iran is right next to it. So it's very clear as you try to look and, see the patterns. It's very clear they are trying to associate Iran with Hezbollah, Hamas, make it all one entity. They'll throw in ISIS every once in a while. They'll throw in Al Qaeda. They want to confuse the American people and make them, basically do word association with everything. So I think Iran is absolutely, the target now, quite frankly, because they've lost the world when it comes to Hamas. Nobody even really takes their side anymore. All right, let's get into the assassinations, because man, those things, they were, I love saying goofy because they were goofy, but also the fact that they happened the week after he gets back, to me, shows the U.S. knew this was going to happen, and they must have signed off on it. They must have said, yeah, go ahead and poke Iran and Hezbollah, so give us your thoughts on those.
Yeah, the biggest assassination was Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, in Tehran specifically, the capital of Iran. The U.S. claims they had no knowledge of this attack beforehand. It's still unclear specifically how Haniyeh got killed. There's been reports saying that a bomb was planted 2 months ago in his apartment that ended up blowing up. Others say it was a projectile drone that shot into his apartment, killing him and his bodyguard. But overall, the only one I think that stands to gain from this assassination is Benjamin Netanyahu. It's very calculated because there was no other person in Hamas to take over for Ismail Haniyeh other than Yahya Sinwar, who is by far the most radical person within Hamas. For those who are in the West, you probably view Hamas as one solitary unit, that everyone in there has a solidified ideology and that they all have the same goals. That cannot be farther from the truth. There are multiple streams, even within Hamas, of how to approach Israel, their views on one state versus two state solutions, a lot of different intricacies about Hamas. And those intricacies are defined through Haniyeh and Sinwar, in my opinion. Haniyeh is someone whose entire career was predicated on diplomacy. He was a disciple of the founder of Hamas, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. And he really had an impetus very early on for building branches out to the rest of the Middle East. He is instrumental in building that relationship between Hamas and Iran, creating their role in the axis of resistance. He is someone who is actually pretty pragmatic and moderate by Hamas standards. Haniyeh is definitely the architect of the 2017 Hamas charter. The original Hamas charter is plagued with more Islamist and anti-Semitic language. It was crafted in 1988. It framed it as a battle more or less between Muslims and Zionist Jews, whereas the more recent charter frames it more as a decolonial struggle. It's removed a lot of the references specifically towards Jews, only using the word Zionist, and at that, it's not even calling for the expulsion of all Jews from the land. And Haniyeh, unlike Sinwar, was okay with a truce along the 1967 borders. So for a defined period of time, Haniyeh was willing to accept a two-state solution. Not permanently, but in the short period. That is not something Sinwar has ever indicated he would be supportive of. Most statements from Sinwar indicate that he wants solely one Muslim state from the river to the sea. Sinwar is an individual who had a very different rising in Hamas than Haniyeh, one that's a little more radical. His evolution in the Palestinian resistance scene really occurred because he was notable for killing fellow Palestinians. Anyone who was accused of being a collaborator with Israel, he built up an organization to prosecute and kill those individuals. That organization would go on to become basically the police of Hamas. He was nicknamed by his fellow Palestinians as the Butcher of Khan Yunis because of how many Palestinians he was responsible for killing. And many of those Palestinians, likely in retrospect, had no collaboration relations with Israel. They were just individuals that were spread by rumor. And so he was someone very radical in the internal struggle of Hamas early on. Since then, he has not moderated himself. He is notable because he has personally tortured many fellow Hamas military commanders himself. Mahmoud Ishtiwi was one of them. He personally saw his execution. He has killed individuals within Hamas for a variety of reasons, and some of which is from proven or disproven records. Sinwar is also someone who was arrested in the 80s, and he was put in prison for around 30 years until the capture of an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. Gilad Shalit was how should I frame this? Let me go back to even there. So while in prison, Sinwar was known for his resourcefulness. He rose through the ranks in Hamas through his prison sentence. He was well known by his fellow inmates as someone who was resourceful, as a leader of prayer. He became known as the Emir of Hamas. But he also was known for his conservatism. Sinwar, upon the capture of Gilad Shalit, an Israeli soldier, actually tried to go against Hamas, other leaders within Hamas, negotiating with Israelis for his release because he said the deals were not favorable enough for Hamas. I think the trade upon his release ended up being 1,000 Hamas soldiers for one Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit. And he said those terms were not favorable enough because they did not include some of the most high-ranking Hamas officials. And he was willing to keep himself in prison because of that. So he was always known as a very staunch conservative, and it was to the detriment of other figures in Hamas who did not like that. Haniyeh, complete opposite figure within Hamas, very pragmatic, very outgoing. He's one who tried to build relationships with people, built his career on diplomacy within Hamas, and now Sinwar has taken his role. And what that indicates is two things from Hamas. One is they've moved in a more conservative direction, given the outbreak of genocide. This is an expected human response from the leaders of Hamas to go in a more conservative direction. They also believe Sinwar is someone who knows Israel better than Haniyeh. He was in Israeli prison. He learned Hebrew to understand Israeli society, Israeli culture, so he knows the enemy better. But it also indicates that now the negotiations have to take place from someone in Gaza rather than someone in Qatar. Haniyeh was subject to the pressures of Iran and Qatar because he was not in Gaza. Sinwar doesn't have those same pressures. He is in the tunnels of Gaza. No one can reach him except his fellow Hamas comrades. So those pressures from external influences in the negotiations are completely eliminated. Sinwar is also just more conservative. He is unlikely to make a deal. And that's why I preface this entire conversation by saying the only one happy about this outside of Hamas is Benjamin Netanyahu. The architect of October 7th, Sinwar, is now the face of negotiations. Netanyahu is just going to say, first of all, I can't negotiate with him. He is the architect of October 7th. And secondly, he's going to say, this guy's too conservative. He doesn't even want to negotiate, unlike Haniyeh, who was willing to negotiate. So it's a lost cause. And we'll just continue bombing Gaza into oblivion. So sorry, they don't want to talk. Not our fault. And so that's
no, I think it's exactly what Netanyahu wants.
Yeah.
Now, here's the I'm gonna throw my curveball at you because man, I seriously I don't trust anybody and I question everybody these days. So I think everything you said was on point. I think this is exactly what Netanyahu wants. Haniyeh sounds like he was trying to negotiate. He was the chief negotiator. They killed his grandkids, then they killed his kids, then they killed him. His whole lineage is gone. They're out of the mix. Sinwar, and I said this on the podcast many times, he's kind of like the Osama bin Laden figure or the Saddam Hussein figure. He's the boogeyman. He's the big bad wolf. He's the enemy. He's the bad guy. He's really the what's the word I'm looking for? Oh gosh. I'm blanking on it. But he's the guy now that they can put in front of the public and get everyone to hate him. Like they want he's really the protagonist or the antagonist. He's the antagonist. You know what I mean? And so I think Netanyahu, as you said, is happy as a pig in shit. The question is, and I swear I've always thought this, could they be in on this together? Like, could Sinwar and Netanyahu, could Netanyahu say, hey, listen, dude, you're going to be the bad guy. Okay, we're going to funnel all this money to you. You're taken care of. We're not going to kill you. I mean, that's what he says now. But you need to take on this role. You need to be the enemy. I mean, I think that's possible. And then I think Iran could be in on it. And then I think the United States could be in on it. And the reason is war is business. This is all big money. Look at how much taxpayer dollars, another 60 billion. Now they're probably going to send even more because, we now need to combat Sinwar and the architect of October 7th. You know, they literally, by doing this, can bring up October 7th over and over and over again. So what are your thoughts? Do you think I'm crazy, or do you think they could be in on it all together and it's just a big ruse on all of us?
Look, I might not go as far as you and say everyone's in on it, but it makes you think how Sinwar is essentially the only leader of Hamas in like the top 5 who is still alive. Haniyeh killed. They said Deif is killed. They're saying all these other elite figures in Hamas have been murdered with precision strikes. How the heck is the architect of October 7th the only one of this group who has not been killed, right? So for at least Netanyahu's perspective, it seems pretty intentional that he's around. And he's definitely reaping the benefits, to say the least. From the U.S. perspective, I'm not sure. The U.S. is claiming they didn't even know that Haniyeh was going to get killed, but like who the heck knows? I doubt Netanyahu conducted this without the okay from the United States. Now, Iran.
There's no way he went rogue and did this. There's no way. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine
there is
that.
no way. And also going back to his speech, he struck a much more bipartisan tone in his speech. He tried to compliment Biden and Trump in the same speech. And you referenced his exploits 10 years earlier with Obama, how he basically gave the middle finger to him. He tried to basically create more rapport this time around. And so I highly doubt he would throw all that away by going behind their back. And it doesn't seem like the U.S. cares very much. It's not like they're sanctioning him or doing anything out of the norm. In fact, it was Joe Biden who said, I think on October 11th, that what Israel should do is not make the same mistakes we made in Iraq by just going rogue and killing everyone in Iraq, but go after the leaders of Hamas, right? And so, of course, Joe Biden gave the approval. Go after the people who are responsible for this. It's also important to note, and this is another contrast between Haniyeh and Sinwar, Haniyeh didn't know about October 7th. Sinwar didn't tell him any of the details. Now, what the media says is the reason for this is that it was a potential intel breach on the part of Hamas. But we know the intel was already captured by Egypt and other players and given to Israel. And I think that's because Sinwar knew Haniyeh would not have been on board with October 7th, at least the way he constructed it. I think from Haniyeh's perspective, he would have liked an attack solely dedicated towards military infrastructure and targets. going to random kibbutzim and doing what they did is not something I think in Haniyeh's interest. But Sinwar, much more radical figure, he was willing to do that. And so there is definitely some nefarious scent in the air regarding what everyone knew, how they were in kibbutz with each other, or cahoots with each other, not kibbutz, sorry, my brain's fried. But there is definitely something that needs to be questioned. Netanyahu, at least, there's no way that Sinwar is the one of the top five still standing without some pre-consideration to that notion. Iran, I think Iran is the only figure that probably has the least to do with all this. Iran did not know about October 7th. Right? If you want to listen to Western pundits, they'll say, oh, the axis of resistance, everything is coordinated between Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. That's not true. They all act independently. They have different levels within the axis of resistance. Some are senior levels like Iran. Some are junior levels. They don't necessarily coordinate on all military activities, and October 7th is a testament to that. Now, Iran is put in a very interesting position with all this, given that the attack happened on their soil. What reports are indicating is they're going to let Hezbollah do an initial response, given the assassination of Fuad Shukr, the number 2 to Nasrallah in Hezbollah. And then they're going to let Iran, basically on Monday, go full-blown assault. And they said that they don't care whether this causes a regional war. But Iran is put in a very interesting position, because if they aren't able to pierce the Iron Dome, or if the Arab allies of the West, namely Jordan, shoot down most of the missiles before they reach Israel, they look really weak and they look really ineffective, and specifically in their position within the axis of resistance and the defenders of Palestine in the Middle East. And so it basically sends a message that Israel can conduct any operation on your soil and they can suffer no consequences. So Iran, I don't know if they were in on it, because they're looking pretty silly right now, given that that happened on their soil in their capital. And it likely came with the collaboration of Iranians who gave the intel to Mossad to conduct an operation like this. So I don't think Iran is in on it, but I think that Iran is put in a very interesting position.
Okay. No, that all makes sense. All right, let me recap that for everybody. So everybody, to understand, Haniyeh was the moderate. He was the one that was trying to negotiate. He gets assassinated inside Iran, in Tehran, while attending the inauguration of the new president.
Yeah.
Now we've got Yahya Sinwar as the lead, and then Yahya Sinwar is the one that was blamed for basically creating October 7th. So now we've got that enemy. Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on to give us an update, because, man, I haven't really been following this. The ICJ and the ICC, International Court of Justice, and then the International Criminal Court. Has there been movement on that stuff?
Yes. So a few weeks ago, the ICJ issued an advisory opinion. And it's important because it's not binding. It's not an actual ruling of any sort. It's just an advisory opinion of the court. And they ruled many important things in this decision, stuff that we have both known for a long time now. One thing that they ruled is that Israel is guilty of racial segregation and apartheid in the West Bank. And that is in violation of the Apartheid Convention, which is hence in violation of international law. They also said that Israel's occupation of the West Bank is illegal because it is indefinite. What Israel claims is that they claim the territory of the West Bank alongside Gaza, alongside the Golan Heights, in a defensive war against invading Arab countries. And what the court ruled is, in the short term, that might be acceptable, but you have governed this territory for decades. You are only supposed to occupy a territory for defensive purposes for a short term. And so what you have done is not only an illegal indefinite occupation, but because you've created facts on the ground through expanding settlements, that constitutes de facto annexation of the West Bank. And so the ICJ calls upon Israel to either remove the settlers, remove the settlements, or to give Palestinian citizenship, which we know Israel will not do, because that would increase 3 million voters within Israel as Arabs, who would definitely vote against any interests of the Israeli government or the Israeli people. But they also ruled that this violates Palestinian civil rights. They said that any Palestinian whose civil rights have been usurped because of the occupation, they deserve reparations. They deserve to have their land given back if it was taken by a settlement. And so this is a very, very important ruling going into the annals of history. This is the biggest ruling from the court since around, I think, 20 years ago, when they ruled that Israel's apartheid wall separating the West Bank from Israel is illegal under international law. And so this is a huge win. Of course, it has no effect in terms of actual practice, but it does put pressure on members of the United Nations who are supposed to recognize this court as legitimate to pressure Israel. The supposed effect of the ruling is to promote a two-state solution to force Israel to engage in negotiations. I don't think that's going to do much. We had around a month ago, Smotrich release his plan to move the status of the West Bank from one of occupation / de facto annexation, because it's under military control, to one of de jure legal annexation by moving it to civilian hands. And so it's going to be very interesting whether the court wants to take a stance if Israel actually decided to de jure annex the West Bank. And it's assumed that the Palestinians in the West Bank would not get citizenship under Smotrich's plan. If Israel decided to annex under international law, they have to get Palestinian citizenship, which we know they will not do.
Yeah, they definitely won't do that. My problem with the ICJ is just, I mean, I love what they're doing, but Israel's not going to listen to them. Like,
Never.
they're not going to do anything. They never have. They're not part of it. America's not part of it. So it basically falls on deaf ears. But again, I guess it's better than nothing. Okay, what else? Any other developments that we need to kind of know about?
I think the most recent development, and it pertains to American politics, is the role of AIPAC in getting Cori Bush defeated in her primary against Bell. This is not the first notable member of the squad, or I guess you can call him part of the squad, to be ousted in this primary cycle. Jamal Bowman was also ousted in his primary because of insane spending on AIPAC's side. I think in total, throughout this election cycle, they're on par to spend, I believe, $100 million, which is insane by PAC standards. And it's specifically targeting progressives. They, as a PAC, are not one that takes necessarily partisan sides. They don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican. They care about Israel, whether you're going to hold Israel as basically defend them in the United States court, no matter what they do. And that's becoming increasingly indefensible, given that Israel is on par to annex the West Bank, given that the Lancet recently reported that they've killed nearly 200,000 Palestinians, and that number is continuing to rise. Israel is an indefensible policy position to maintain here in the West, but AIPAC's whole position is trying to make it defensible and putting politicians in place who will do that. And Cori Bush, one of the most outspoken advocates against AIPAC, against Israel's assault on the Palestinians. She was an early member of Congress to call for a ceasefire and that everyone from the river to the sea, whether you're Jewish or Arab, deserves to live with life, dignity, and respect. AIPAC wasn't having that, and so they had her ousted. Her opponent was someone who was supposed to run for senator of Missouri, and he told Cori Bush as much in released correspondence between the two. However, with that AIPAC money, he decided to go down to a congressional race and challenge Cori Bush, and she lost. It was not necessarily, even a close race, but that's the power of AIPAC.
Yeah. And just for everybody, if they don't know, gosh, I've been meaning to do an episode on them, but AIPAC is the American Israeli Political Action Committee, and it's a huge lobby organization. I've done an episode on PACs and super PACs, but I'll have to revisit that. Okay. Yeah, I think that's important. Now, last thing, what's interesting about getting rid of Cori Bush and getting rid of Jamal Bowman, two progressives, Tim Walz now, the VP pick for Kamala, he's technically a progressive. So it's interesting that now Kamala picks a progressive, and you would think AIPAC would not be happy about it, but I haven't seen Tim Walz be vocal at all against Israel or pro-Palestinian. I don't know if you have. Maybe he plays ball with them, so they don't really care.
He's played ball with both sides a little bit. He has taken AIPAC money in the past, but he's done a lot of things that progressives are very proud about with regards to Israel and Palestine. Around 10 years ago, he started his campaign talking about the illegal settlements in the West Bank. That was something even progressive at the time for most in the Democratic Party. That's more a mainstream position now, but he led the charge in that regard. In November of this year, he was one of the earliest politicians in the Democratic Party to come out in support of a ceasefire, who wasn't from the squad. Rashida Tlaib was, of course, the first one to come out for a ceasefire, I think the day after October 7th. But he was one of the next people in the Democratic Party, specifically a Democratic governor, so a much more prominent position to take that stance. He has also given credence to the uncommitted vote. I think Minnesota was one of the largest states in terms of the uncommitted vote. I think they had roughly 20% of their Democratic primary go to uncommitted voters. And he said, rather than tuning this population out, we should listen to them. We should listen to their concerns. We should try and grow from their commentary and become a better party. But that's not to say he hasn't had flaws. He definitely has. In the 10 months this genocide has been conducted in Gaza, he has failed to meet with the families of Gazans in Minnesota who have been affected. And that is a big stain. And I think the reasons progressives are willing to play ball with him is because he's shown a capacity to go in a more progressive direction on this issue. When he's exposed to new information, he's not the type to necessarily ground in his heels, but the one to reform his actions. And he's historically done as much. One thing that progressives are a little bit divided on is his response to the Black Lives Matter protests. He did have the National Guard called in 2020 on the protesters, but he tried his best, I think, to withhold it from actually happening. It was a few months that actually took place until the National Guard was called in. But when they were called in, progressives were not the happiest. But in terms of Israel-Palestine, he is someone who we think is going to get a ceasefire on the ground immediately. Kamala needs to definitely clarify her stance both on weapons transfers to Israel and a ceasefire. But compared to J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Walz is by far the best when it comes to Israel-Palestine in that cohort of four warmongers.
That's perfect. All right, buddy. I think anything else?
That's all
That
I
was
have.
great. All right,
Thank you.
man. We appreciate you. We'll check back in soon.
You're the best, Ray. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be on.
Take care, Elijah.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.